September 15th, 1940. Prime Minister's official residence, Tokyo, Japan. The cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stubbed out his third lucky strike of the meeting, the American tobacco a small irony lost on no one present. Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoye had asked the question directly, cutting through the usual circumlocutions of Japanese diplomacy. If we go to war with America, what are our chances? Yamamoto's response would haunt the Japanese Empire until its dying day. If I am told to fight regardless of consequences, I shall run wild for the first 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year. The other military officials in the room shifted uncomfortably. Here was the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, the man who would have to lead any war against America, essentially predicting Japan's defeat before the first shot was fired. What they didn't fully grasp was that Yamamoto wasn't speculating. He had witnessed American manufacturing power firsthand, walked through its factories, studied its oil fields, calculated its production capability down to the last rivet. The mathematics of destruction had been computed years earlier in the lecture halls of Harvard, confirmed in the steel mills of Pennsylvania, and verified in the endless oil derricks of Texas. Yamamoto knew something his colleagues didn't want to accept. Japan had already lost any war with America before it began. The only variable was time. 6 months. He would give them half a year of victories before the industrial colossus fully awakened. Isoroku Takano was born on April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, a small city in Niigata Prefecture, the 6th son of an impoverished schoolteacher. His father was 56 years old at his birth, leading to the name Isoroku, meaning 56 in Japanese. The family's poverty was crushing. They often survived on sweet potatoes and barley, unable to afford rice. This early hardship would later make Yamamoto's observations of American abundance all the more striking. In 1916, the young naval officer was adopted by the Yamamoto family, a common practice for advancing in Japanese society. By then, he had already lost 2 fingers on his left hand at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, where he witnessed Japan's stunning victory over Russia's Baltic fleet. That victory had convinced many Japanese that spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage, a delusion Yamamoto would spend his life trying to dispel. The Tsushima veteran understood something his contemporaries missed. Japan's victory over Russia had been possible only because Russia had to project power across thousands of miles while fighting a simultaneous revolution at home. America would face no such disadvantages. But to truly understand this, Yamamoto needed to experience America directly. His first glimpse came in 1919 when, as a 35-year-old commander, he received orders that would change not just his life, but the course of history, report to Harvard University for English Language Studies, and observe American naval developments. What happened next would transform a Japanese patriot into Cassandra, prophesying doom that none would heed. April 1919. Yamamoto arrived at Harvard carrying 2 swords and wearing his naval uniform, a figure of curiosity among the ivy-covered buildings of Cambridge. He enrolled as a special student, ostensibly to study English. His transcript would later show a mediocre C+ in the language course, but this grade obscured the real education taking place. Living in modest quarters in Brookline, Massachusetts, Yamamoto established a routine that would have seemed obsessive to observers. He slept only 3 to 4 hours nightly, spending the rest of his time reading everything he could about American industry, petroleum production, and aviation. His room became cluttered with maps of oil fields, statistical abstracts of American manufacturing, and technical journals about steel production. The future Yamamoto witnessed was powered by oil. While his fellow Japanese students, approximately 70 of them at Harvard during his time, attended formal classes, Yamamoto spent hours at Harvard's Widener Library researching petroleum geology and refining capacity. He discovered that America produced 65% of the world's oil, 378 million barrels in 1919 alone. Japan, by contrast, had to import nearly every drop, mostly from America itself. But the real education came during Harvard's summer breaks. Yamamoto would disappear for weeks, hitchhiking across America with little more than a few dollars in his pocket. His first major expedition took him to the oil fields of Texas, where he spent 3 weeks studying extraction methods and refinery operations. He survived on bread, bananas, and water, sleeping in fields and barns, all to save money for longer observations. Summer 1920. Yamamoto stood outside the Ford Highland Park plant in Detroit, watching the shift change. 20,000 workers streamed out, most heading to private automobiles, a sight that would have been impossible in Japan, where even military officers rarely owned cars. He had hitchhiked 900 miles from Cambridge to observe what Henry Ford called the liberation of the common man. Inside the plant, which Yamamoto toured by claiming to be a visiting engineering student, he observed the assembly line that had revolutionized manufacturing. A Model T rolled off the line every 45 seconds. Workers performed single, repetitive tasks with precision timing. The entire process, from raw steel to finished automobile, took just 93 minutes. Yamamoto filled 3 notebooks during his week in Detroit. He calculated that Ford alone employed more industrial workers than the entire Japanese Navy. The company's daily steel consumption exceeded Japan's weekly production. Most disturbing of all, this was just one company in one city in one industry. The Americans have made manufacturing into a science, he wrote to his mentor, Admiral Tomosaburo Kato. They produce machines the way we produce rice, systematically, efficiently, in quantities that defy imagination. Each worker is a specialist, each process is measured, each improvement is incorporated immediately. There is no waste, no delay, no inefficiency. The numbers were staggering. American automobile production had grown from 485,000 vehicles in 1915 to 2.3 million in 1920. By the time Yamamoto visited, Americans owned 1 car for every 13 people. In Japan, the ratio was 1 per 5,000. But Yamamoto recognized something beyond mere numbers. He understood that mass automobile production meant mass production capability for military vehicles. Those assembly lines producing Model Ts could just as easily produce military trucks, tanks, and aircraft engines. The workers skilled in precision manufacturing could build weapons. The vast supply chains delivering parts to Detroit could deliver ammunition to battlefields. Yamamoto's most extensive unauthorized journey took him to Texas in the summer of 1921, just before his Harvard graduation. He disappeared for 6 weeks, causing minor diplomatic concern when he missed several official functions. He had gone to observe what he called the fountains of power, the oil fields of East Texas. Traveling by freight train and on foot, Yamamoto reached the Spindletop field near Beaumont, where the modern oil industry had been born in 1901. Though past its peak, the field still produced thousands of barrels daily. Yamamoto spent days talking to roughnecks and engineers, learning about drilling techniques, extraction rates, and refining processes. The scale defied Japanese comprehension. Single wells produced more oil in a day than Japan imported in a week. The Texaco refinery at Port Arthur, which Yamamoto sketched in detail, processed 100,000 barrels daily. The entire facility was powered by electricity, with automatic pumps and electric lighting that ran 24 hours a day. Oil is the blood of modern warfare, Yamamoto wrote in his journal. Ships, planes, tanks, trucks, all drink oil. America has oceans of it beneath their soil. Japan has none. This single fact determines everything. He travelled north to the newly discovered fields in Kilgore and Longview, experiencing the boom that would make East Texas the world's largest oil producer. Derricks sprouted like forests, so dense that workers could walk from one to another without touching the ground. Natural gas, considered waste, was burned off in flares that lit the night sky for miles. The waste particularly struck Yamamoto. Japan carefully conserved every drop of imported fuel, while Americans burned off enough natural gas daily to power all of Tokyo for a month. This casual abundance, more than any military demonstration, convinced him of America's invincibility. In January 1926, Yamamoto returned to America as Japan's naval attaché in Washington, with the rank of captain. This posting, lasting until March 1928, would confirm every fear his Harvard years had instilled. Now, with diplomatic status and a proper budget, he could travel freely and observe officially. His first priority was updating his industrial intelligence. American production had exploded during his absence. Automobile manufacturing was heading toward 4.3 million vehicles by 1926. Steel production hit 48 million tons. Oil production exceeded 770 million barrels. The numbers weren't just growing, they were accelerating. Yamamoto established a routine of systematic observation. Monday through Wednesday, he worked at the embassy, attending naval conferences and diplomatic functions. Thursday through Sunday, he travelled, always with the same focus: production capability, resource extraction, and technological advancement. His travels took him to the Bethlehem steel plant in Pennsylvania, where he observed the production of naval armour plate. The facility's electric furnaces could produce specialised steel that took Japanese foundries weeks to manufacture in hours. The plant employed 30,000 workers and consumed more electricity than the entire city of Kyoto. In Birmingham, Alabama, he studied the iron ore supply chain that fed American steel production. Trains arrived every hour carrying ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range, coal from Pennsylvania, and limestone from Indiana. The integration and efficiency of the supply chain amazed him. Materials moved thousands of miles with clockwork precision, coordinated by telegraph and telephone networks that Japan couldn't match. During his Washington posting, Yamamoto became famous for his poker games. Every Friday night he hosted games at his apartment, inviting American naval officers, diplomats, and intelligence officials. These weren't mere social occasions. They were intelligence operations conducted over cards and whiskey. Captain Ellis Zacharias of Naval Intelligence became a regular participant. Decades later, Zacharias would reveal in his 1946 memoir, Secret Missions, that these games involved careful probing by both sides. While bluffing over cards, the players conducted subtle interrogations about naval doctrine, ship capabilities, and strategic thinking. Yamamoto was brilliant at poker, Zacharias recalled. He could remember every card played, calculate odds instantly, and read faces like books. But more importantly, he used the games to understand American psychology. He wanted to know how Americans thought, how they made decisions, how they reacted to pressure. The poker games revealed something crucial to Yamamoto. Americans were risk-takers who could afford to lose. They bet aggressively because they had deep pockets. They could absorb losses and continue playing. This mentality, Yamamoto realized, reflected their national strategy. America could lose battles, even campaigns, and continue fighting. Japan, with its limited resources, could not afford a single major defeat. One evening in February 1926, after winning a substantial pot, Yamamoto made a comment that Zacharias never forgot. In poker and war, the player with the most chips can afford to wait for the right cards. Japan is playing with borrowed chips against a player who owns the bank. Yamamoto's greatest strategic insight during his American years concerned aviation. While most naval officers still thought in terms of battleships, Yamamoto understood that aircraft would determine future naval warfare. America was perfectly positioned to dominate this new dimension. He visited the Glenn L. Martin Company in Cleveland, Ohio, where aircraft were mass-produced using automobile-style assembly techniques. Workers who had never seen an airplane before training could build complex aircraft in weeks. The factory produced 6 planes daily, with electric tools and powered conveyors speeding production. At McCook Field in Dayton, Ohio, predecessor to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Yamamoto observed American aviation research. The facility employed more aeronautical engineers than existed in all of Japan. They had wind tunnels, engine test facilities, and materials laboratories that Japanese aviation couldn't match. The numbers told the story. In 1926, American aircraft manufacturers produced 1,186 military aircraft and 5,789 civilian planes. American airlines were already carrying mail and passengers on regular schedules across the continent. Japan struggled to produce 200 aircraft annually, mostly using imported engines and instruments. "The Americans think in 3 dimensions," Yamamoto wrote in a report to Tokyo. "While we perfect our battleships, they are building the infrastructure for aerial warfare. They have the aluminum production, the engine technology, and most importantly, the production capacity to build aircraft by the thousands." His warnings were largely ignored. The Japanese Navy remained focused on battleships, planning for a decisive surface engagement that Yamamoto knew would never come. Aircraft carriers were still considered auxiliary vessels, useful for reconnaissance but not decisive in battle. Yamamoto's most extensive tour of American industry came in the summer of 1926. Using his diplomatic status and cultivated connections, he arranged visits to facilities most foreigners never saw. Each visit added data points to his growing calculation of American invincibility. At the River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan, Yamamoto observed the full integration of American manufacturing power. The facility, covering 2,000 acres, was a city unto itself. Iron ore arrived by ship, coal by train, rubber from Firestone plantations in Liberia. Everything from steel smelting to final assembly happened on site. The complex employed 100,000 workers and had its own power plant generating 400,000 horsepower of electricity. The scale overwhelmed even Yamamoto's preparations. He had studied the statistics, but experiencing the reality was different. Blast furnaces stories tall operated continuously. Assembly lines stretched for miles. The parking lots held 25,000 workers' cars, more automobiles than existed in most Japanese cities. At Standard Oil's Bayway refinery in New Jersey, Yamamoto witnessed petroleum refining on an industrial scale. The facility processed 100,000 barrels daily, producing not just fuel, but hundreds of petroleum products from lubricants to chemicals. The catalytic cracking towers, invented just years earlier, could extract twice as much gasoline from crude oil as Japanese refineries. "They have solved the equation of modern war," Yamamoto noted. "Unlimited raw materials plus unlimited production capacity plus unlimited innovation equals inevitable victory. Japan has none of these advantages." In late 1926, Yamamoto traveled to California, ostensibly for a naval conference in San Francisco, but actually to assess America's Pacific capabilities. What he found was a coast transforming into an impregnable fortress of industrial power. The Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo could build and repair capital ships simultaneously. The facility had electrical capacity exceeding all Japanese naval bases combined. San Francisco Bay was ringed with military installations, each larger than anything Japan possessed. In Los Angeles, Yamamoto observed the birth of the aviation industry that would doom Japan. Douglas Aircraft Company, founded just 6 years earlier, was already producing advanced aircraft using revolutionary stressed skin construction. The company employed 300 engineers experimenting with designs that wouldn't reach Japan for a decade. But it was the oil fields of Southern California that most impressed Yamamoto. The Los Angeles basin contained more than 20 major oil fields. Signal Hill alone had 265 wells so closely spaced they looked like a forest of steel trees. California produced 230 million barrels annually, more than Japan would consume in 5 years of war. The ports told another story. San Pedro and Long Beach were expanding rapidly, with electric cranes and automated loading systems. A single berth could load more cargo in a day than Tokyo port handled in a week. The infrastructure for projecting power across the Pacific was already in place. Returning to Japan in March 1928, Yamamoto submitted a 200-page report on American capabilities that should have ended any thought of war. His conclusions were stark. American manufacturing exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10 to 20 in every critical category. American oil production was 100 times Japan's consumption. American steel production was 12 times greater than Japan's. American automobile production demonstrated mass production capability that could be instantly converted to military use. American aviation was advancing so rapidly that Japan could never catch up. The report was classified, filed, and largely ignored. The Navy Ministry focused on the sections about American naval construction, while dismissing the industrial analysis as outside naval concerns. The Army, planning its expansion into China, had no interest in Yamamoto's warnings about American power. Yamamoto found himself increasingly isolated. His American experience, rather than being valued, made him suspect. He was too Americanized, some whispered. His habits, drinking coffee instead of tea, smoking Lucky Strikes, reading American magazines, marked him as contaminated by foreign influence. But Yamamoto continued his warnings. In lecture after lecture, article after article, he hammered home the same message. Japan could not defeat America in a prolonged war. The industrial disparity was not just quantitative but qualitative. America had created a system of innovation and production that improved continuously. Japan, with its limited resources and rigid society, could not match this dynamism. By 1939, Yamamoto's opposition to war with America had made him a target for assassination by ultranationalist army officers. The same groups that had assassinated moderate politicians now focused on the admiral who insisted Japan couldn't win a war with America. The threat was so serious that Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who shared Yamamoto's views, transferred him to sea duty as Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. The appointment, announced on August 30, 1939, was explicitly to save Yamamoto's life. At sea, he would be safe from army extremists. The irony was complete. The man most opposed to war with America was given command of the force that would have to fight it. Yamamoto understood the cruel logic. If war came, Japan needed its best strategist commanding the fleet, even if that strategist believed the war was unwinnable. "I have been given command of the Combined Fleet," he wrote to his friend Yoshida. "It is like being asked to perform surgery on a patient who insists on committing suicide. I can perhaps delay the agony, but I cannot prevent the death." His opposition never wavered. In September 1940, when the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy was being debated, Yamamoto warned it would lead inevitably to war with America. To Prince Konoye, he was blunt. "If we fight Americans, I can give you 1 year. After that, I guarantee nothing." In October 1940, to Navy Minister Admiral Koshiro Oikawa, he was even more specific. "If I am ordered to fight, I shall do my best for 6 months. I shall run wild considerably for the first half year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year." The supreme irony of Yamamoto's career came in January 1941, when he began planning the Pearl Harbor attack. The man who knew Japan couldn't win was tasked with finding a way to win. His solution was based entirely on his American experience. Yamamoto knew that America's weakness was psychological, not material. Americans, secure in their continental fortress, didn't expect attack. Their very strength bred complacency. A devastating first strike might shock them into negotiation before their economic strength could mobilize. The plan was desperate because the situation was desperate. Japan needed to destroy the American Pacific Fleet before it could interfere with operations in Southeast Asia. More importantly, Japan needed to convince America that fighting would be too costly. But even as he planned, Yamamoto knew it would fail. Not the attack itself. He was confident his pilots could devastate Pearl Harbor. The failure would come in the aftermath, when America's manufacturing power turned to war production. He had observed the factories that would produce the weapons. He had calculated the oil that would fuel the counterattack. He had experienced the mass production techniques that would build fleets of ships and planes. The Pearl Harbor attack would succeed tactically and fail strategically, exactly as he predicted. As 1941 progressed and war became inevitable, Yamamoto's warnings grew more desperate and specific. To his staff officers celebrating Japan's military prowess, he provided sobering mathematics. America has 500,000 tons of oil in reserve for every ton Japan possesses. They produce 500 times more steel. Their factories can retool in weeks to produce weapons. We have already lost this war. We simply haven't started fighting it yet. In September 1941, addressing the graduation class at his alma mater in Nagaoka, Yamamoto delivered perhaps his most poignant warning. Most people think Americans love luxury and that their culture is shallow and meaningless. It is a mistake to regard the Americans as luxury-loving and weak. I can tell you that they are full of spirit, adventure, and fight. Their thinking is scientific and well advanced. Lindbergh's solo crossing of the Atlantic is the sort of valiant act which is normal for them. He continued, "Do not forget that American industry is much more developed than ours, and unlike us, they have all the oil they want. Japan cannot beat America. Therefore, Japan should not fight America." The young graduates sat in stunned silence. Here was one of Japan's most celebrated admirals telling them their country would lose a war it seemed determined to start. To his mistress, Chiyoko Kawai, he was even more direct in his letters. "The government has been lying to the people. They speak of America as weak and divided. I have been there. I have observed their strength. We are insects declaring war on a dragon." The attack on Pearl Harbor succeeded beyond expectations. 8 battleships damaged or sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed, 2,403 Americans killed. The combined fleet's losses were minimal: 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, 64 men killed. Across Japan, crowds celebrated in the streets. The emperor's announcement of war was greeted with banzai cheers. Finally, Japan had shown the arrogant Americans their place. The white colonialists would be driven from Asia. Aboard his flagship Nagato in Hiroshima Bay, Yamamoto received the reports in silence. When his staff broke out sake to celebrate, he retired to his cabin. Chief of Staff Admiral Matome Ugaki found him there hours later, staring at charts of the Pacific. Years later, Hollywood would put words in Yamamoto's mouth about awakening a sleeping giant, a phrase he never actually said. His real documented words to Ogata Taketora were more precise and less poetic. "A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack." The failure to destroy the American carriers concerned him, but not as much as the failure to destroy the oil tanks and repair facilities. Yamamoto understood from his visits to American ports how quickly they could rebuild. The damage looked devastating, but was actually superficial. More troubling was the diplomatic failure that made the attack a surprise. Yamamoto had insisted the attack follow a declaration of war. Japanese embassy bungling had prevented this. Americans would now see Pearl Harbor as a sneak attack, ensuring no negotiated peace was possible. "I had hoped to fight a war of honor," he told Ugaki. "Instead, we have guaranteed our own destruction through dishonor." Exactly as Yamamoto predicted, Japan ran wild for half a year. The combined fleet swept across the Pacific, crushing Allied forces with stunning efficiency. Singapore fell. The Philippines fell. The Dutch East Indies fell. By May 1942, Japan controlled an empire stretching from the borders of India to the middle of the Pacific. But Yamamoto took no joy in these victories. He understood they were illusions, possible only because America hadn't yet mobilized. In his cabin, he kept charts showing American ship construction. The numbers were terrifying. In the first 6 months of 1942, American shipyards launched 2 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, 23 destroyers, 26 submarines. This was just the beginning. Yamamoto knew from his visits to American shipyards that they were still retooling. When fully operational, they would produce ships faster than Japan could sink them. The oil situation was even worse. Despite capturing the Dutch East Indies oil fields, Japan couldn't match American production. America produced more oil in a month than Japan's captured fields produced in a year, and American synthetic rubber production, which Yamamoto had studied in 1926, meant they didn't even need Asian rubber plantations. "We are children who have stolen candy," he told his operations officer. "We celebrate while the adult prepares his punishment." The Battle of Midway began on June 4, 1942, almost exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto's prophecy was about to be fulfilled with mathematical precision. The plan was complex, perhaps too complex, reflecting Yamamoto's desperation. He understood this might be Japan's last chance to destroy American carriers before overwhelming reinforcements arrived. The intelligence he received suggested America had at most 2 operational carriers in the Pacific. In reality, they had 3, plus the advantage of broken Japanese codes. The disaster unfolded with the inevitability Yamamoto had long foreseen. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk in a single day. These were irreplaceable losses. Japan had neither the production capability nor the trained pilots to recover from such a blow. Aboard the Yamato, 300 miles behind the carrier force, Yamamoto received the reports in silence. When informed that all 4 carriers were lost, he simply nodded. Staff officers later reported he seemed almost relieved, as if a long-expected burden had finally arrived. "The American giant is now fully awake," he told his staff. "From this moment, we fight only to delay the inevitable." The numbers proved him right. In the 18 months after Midway, America would launch 17 fleet carriers and 76 escort carriers. Japan would launch 6 fleet carriers total. The industrial equation Yamamoto had calculated at Harvard was playing out exactly as predicted. After Midway, American production statistics reached levels that would have seemed fantastical even to Yamamoto's pessimistic calculations. The industrial colossus hadn't just awakened, it had become a force of nature. By 1943, American factories were producing 1 aircraft every 5 minutes, 1 merchant ship every day, 1 aircraft carrier every month, 150 tanks daily, 500,000 military trucks annually. The Ford Willow Run plant alone, which didn't exist when Yamamoto visited Detroit, was producing B-24 bombers at a rate of 1 every 63 minutes. The entire facility had been built in 9 months, faster than Japan could construct a single factory. Yamamoto received these intelligence reports with grim satisfaction. Everything he had predicted was coming true, only faster and more overwhelmingly than even he had imagined. The assembly lines he had studied in Detroit were now producing instruments of Japan's destruction. The oil situation was catastrophic. America was producing 1.7 billion barrels annually by 1943. Japan's entire strategic reserve was 50 million barrels and shrinking daily. American submarines, produced at a rate Japan couldn't match, were strangling Japanese oil shipments from Southeast Asia. "I told them about the oil," Yamamoto wrote in his private diary. "I showed them the numbers. They chose not to believe. Now our ships sit in port for lack of fuel while American task forces roam at will." Through 1942 and early 1943, Yamamoto commanded the combined fleet with the full knowledge of inevitable defeat. His letters to Chiyoko Kawai, discovered after the war, reveal a man haunted by his foresight. I am like a doctor treating a patient I have already diagnosed as terminal. I can ease some symptoms, delay the final moment, but I cannot change the outcome. The disease is industrial inferiority, and it is fatal. His staff noticed his increasing fatalism. He took greater risks, exposed himself to danger unnecessarily. During an inspection tour of forward bases, he insisted on visiting the most dangerous positions, as if courting the death that would release him from commanding a doomed fleet. Admiral Ugaki wrote in his diary, "The Commander-in-Chief seems to welcome danger. He understands something we refuse to acknowledge, that we have already lost. His burden is not command, but prophecy fulfilled." Yamamoto's final strategic assessment, written in March 1943, was stark. America has replaced every ship lost at Pearl Harbor twice over. They have trained more pilots in 1 year than Japan has trained in 20. Their production increases monthly while ours declines. Mathematics, not courage, determines victory. The mathematics doom us. American codebreakers intercepted Yamamoto's travel itinerary on April 14, 1943. He would be inspecting forward bases in the Solomon Islands, flying from Rabaul to Balale Island on April 18th. The schedule was precise to the minute, typical of Yamamoto's attention to detail. Operation Vengeance was approved at the highest levels. Admiral Chester Nimitz asked if it was worth revealing American code-breaking capabilities. The answer was yes. Yamamoto was irreplaceable, not just as a strategist, but as the only Japanese leader who truly understood American capabilities. 18 P-38. Lightning fighters were dispatched from Guadalcanal, flying at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. The mission required precise navigation over 435 miles of open ocean, arriving at the exact minute Yamamoto's plane would be approaching Bougainville. The technology that killed Yamamoto embodied everything he had warned about. The P-38s were products of American mass production, powered by Allison engines producing 1,600 horsepower each, burning high-octane fuel from Texas refineries. Their navigation was perfect, their timing precise, their execution flawless. At 9:34 a.m., Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G-4M bomber was shot down over the jungle of Bougainville. The man who had experienced America's manufacturing power firsthand was killed by its products. Advanced fighters guided by code-breaking technology Japan couldn't match. His body was found the next day, still strapped to his seat, hand on his sword. In his coat pocket was a poem he had written days earlier. "I have seen the future, and it belongs to those who build, not those who destroy." Yamamoto's death removed the one Japanese leader who truly understood the hopelessness of Japan's position. His replacement, Admiral Minichi Koga, lacked both Yamamoto's strategic vision and his first-hand knowledge of American capabilities. The prophecy Yamamoto had made in 1940, 6 months to a year of victories, then inevitable defeat, proved precisely accurate. Every prediction he had made based on his American observations came true. American production overwhelmed Japanese forces exactly as he had calculated. American oil resources proved unlimited, while Japan's dwindled to nothing. American technology, particularly radar and code-breaking, gave decisive advantages. American mass production techniques allowed rapid replacement of losses. American industrial conversion from civilian to military production exceeded even his warnings. By 1944, America was producing more war materials in a month than Japan produced in a year. The factories Yamamoto had visited in the 1920s were now operating at levels that defied comprehension. The River Rouge plant alone was producing more military vehicles than all of Japan's factories combined. August 1945 brought the ultimate validation of Yamamoto's warnings. The atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were products of American industrial and scientific capability that even Yamamoto hadn't fully foreseen, though he had warned about American technological superiority. The Manhattan Project had cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire military budget for the war. It employed 130,000 workers, used more electricity than entire Japanese cities, and required industrial precision Japan couldn't achieve. The bombs were delivered by B-29 superfortresses, each costing more than a Japanese destroyer, produced in quantities Japan couldn't match. Captain Ellis Zacharias, Yamamoto's poker partner from Washington days, broadcast to Japan in Japanese, reminding listeners of Yamamoto's warnings. Your Admiral Yamamoto knew this day would come. He observed our factories, our oil fields, our laboratories. He tried to warn you. You chose not to listen. The final statistics of the war vindicated every calculation Yamamoto had made. Production comparison 1941 to 1945. Aircraft: USA 300,000, Japan 76,320. Aircraft carriers: USA 141, Japan 16. Battleships: USA 8/Japan 2. Submarines: USA 203, Japan 126. Merchant shipping: USA 33,993,230 tons. Japan 4,152,361 tons. These weren't just numbers. They were the mathematical proof of what Yamamoto had witnessed directly, an industrial colossus that, once aroused, could not be defeated by any island nation dependent on imported resources. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces discovered Yamamoto's private papers, including letters never sent and diaries never meant for publication. These documents revealed the full extent of his foreknowledge and despair. In an unsent letter to Emperor Hirohito, dated December 1st, 1941, Yamamoto had written, "Your Majesty, I have failed in my duty to prevent this war. Having experienced America's strength directly, I know we cannot prevail. Their factories can produce unlimited weapons. Their oil fields can fuel unlimited operations. Their people, once aroused, will not stop until victory is complete. I can give your Majesty half a year of victories. After that, mathematics takes over. We are 70 million people with no resources fighting 130 million people with unlimited resources. The outcome is predetermined." Another letter, to his successor Admiral Koga, written days before his death. "You will inherit a fleet that is doomed, not by lack of courage or skill, but by industrial mathematics. Every ship you lose, they will replace with 3. Every plane destroyed, they will replace with 10. Every gallon of fuel burned brings us closer to immobility while they swim in oceans of oil. I have witnessed their production directly. We fight not a nation, but a continental industrial machine. Hold out as long as honor demands, but know that defeat is certain." The supreme irony of Yamamoto's story lies not in his death, but in his life. The man who best understood America's power was forced to lead the war against it. The admiral who knew Japan would lose had to plan the attack that guaranteed that loss. The prophet who warned against awakening the giant had to deliver the awakening blow. His Harvard classmates, learning of his role in Pearl Harbor, expressed shock. Professor Theodore McNally, who had taught Yamamoto economics, said, "He knew better than anyone that Japan couldn't win. He observed our steel mills, our oil wells, our assembly lines. He understood mass production. For him to have planned Pearl Harbor must have been agony." But Yamamoto had no choice. In the rigid hierarchy of Imperial Japan, refusal meant not just personal disgrace, but abandonment of his duty to minimize the catastrophe he saw coming. He could not prevent the war, but perhaps he could shorten it through initial victories that might lead to negotiation. Japanese military historians, studying Yamamoto's warnings after the war, realized the full magnitude of their blindness. Every prediction he had made proved accurate, every warning validated by events. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who commanded the fleet in the war's final stages, admitted, "Yamamoto saw what we refused to see. He had been to America. He knew their capacity. We dismissed his warnings as defeatism. We believed our spirit could overcome their material advantage. He knew spirit could not overcome mathematics. General Hideki Tojo, the prime minister who had pushed for war, said at his war crimes trial, "Admiral Yamamoto told us we could not win. He had studied in America. He knew their industry. We thought he was too influenced by Western thinking. We were wrong. He was simply telling the truth." The tragedy extended beyond individual blindness. Japan's entire military establishment had ignored the one man who had actually studied their enemy's capabilities. They preferred comfortable illusions to uncomfortable facts. They chose mystical beliefs about Japanese superiority over empirical evidence of American strength. Paradoxically, Yamamoto was more respected by his enemies than his own government. American naval officers who had known him expressed genuine regret at his death, even while celebrating the tactical success. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had ordered Operation Vengeance, later said, "Yamamoto was the only Japanese leader who truly understood American power. He had observed our country, studied our industry, knew our psychology. His death was necessary but tragic. He was a man who knew the truth and was forced to act against it." Ellis Zacharias, his poker companion from the 1920s, wrote a remarkable epitaph. "Yamamoto was a prophet without honor in his own country. He witnessed our economic strength and warned against challenging it. He understood that modern war is won in factories, not battlefields. His tragedy was being too perceptive in a culture that valued conformity over truth." Captain Layton, who had helped break the Japanese codes, reflected, "We killed the one Japanese leader who might have shortened the war." He knew Japan had lost before it began. With him gone, Japanese leadership passed to men who believed their own propaganda. The war dragged on for 2 more bloody years. Declassified documents in the 1970s revealed the full extent of Yamamoto's American intelligence gathering. His reports from the 1920s showed remarkably accurate predictions of American wartime production. He had correctly estimated American aircraft production capacity within 10% of actual wartime peak, oil production within 5% of wartime output, steel production within 15% of wartime levels, shipbuilding capacity within 20% of actual production. His methodology was meticulous. He had counted factory floor space, calculated worker productivity, measured supply chain efficiency, and extrapolated wartime potential. His calculations, done with slide rules and notebooks, proved more accurate than many computer projections today. Most remarkably, he had predicted the psychological impact of Pearl Harbor. In a 1940 memo, he wrote, "A surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would tactically succeed, but strategically fail. Americans would unite in rage. Their industrial power, fully mobilized by anger, would be unstoppable." Yamamoto's story transcends its historical moment. It is fundamentally about the danger of wishful thinking when confronting mathematical reality. He had witnessed the numbers, observed the production, calculated the outcome. His tragedy was that no one wanted to hear the truth. In his final letter to Chiyoko Kawai, written days before his death, Yamamoto achieved a kind of peace. "I have done my duty as I understood it. I warned them based on what I had witnessed. I told them about the factories, the oil, the endless production. They chose war anyway. I led their fleet knowing we would lose, hoping only to make the defeat less catastrophic. History will judge whether I was right to serve a cause I knew was doomed. But I could not abandon my country, even when my country abandoned reason." The letter concluded with a haiku that captured his entire journey. "Spring rain in Texas. I saw iron become doom. Math defeats courage." Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto died knowing every prediction he had made would come true. The 6 months of victories he promised lasted exactly from December 7th, 1941, to June 4th, 1942. The industrial tsunami he had warned about materialized with mathematical precision. The giant he feared to awaken arose with exactly the terrible resolve he had predicted. His years in America, at Harvard studying petroleum engineering, in Detroit observing assembly lines, in Texas counting oil derricks, in Washington measuring economic capacity, had given him perfect foresight. He witnessed not just America's present strength, but its latent potential. He understood that modern war was won by production statistics, not warrior spirit. The American factories he had visited as a student and attaché became the arsenals that crushed the empire he served. The oil fields he had studied fueled the fleets that destroyed his navy. The assembly lines he had witnessed produced the aircraft that burned Japanese cities. Every notebook he had filled with observations became a prophecy of doom fulfilled. Yet Yamamoto's story is not ultimately about defeat, but about the courage to speak truth to power, even when that truth is unwelcome. He experienced what others refused to see, calculated what others refused to count, and warned what others refused to hear. His tragedy was not that he was wrong, but that he was absolutely right. In the end, Admiral Yamamoto's American education taught him the most bitter lesson of all, that in modern industrial warfare, mathematics is destiny. He had done the math, witnessed the factors, calculated the outcome. Japan would have 6 months to run wild, then face inevitable defeat from an aroused industrial giant. He was right to the day. The man who spent years in America warning Japan would lose in 6 months became history's most tragic prophet. Condemned to lead a war he knew was lost before the first shot was fired, killed by the very American technology he had warned would prove decisive, and vindicated only in the ashes of his nation's defeat. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had experienced America, and he knew.